Five majors. There's more, but these are the major factors that derive that. The number one and overriding remains our debt crisis. It's now spiraling out of control. We're watching the Congressional Budget Office boost up again, just less than a year later, to now saying that we're going to be at $54 trillion in national debt in less than 10 years. When just a year ago that was 50, and 2 years before that it was only 38. So they recognized how out of control the national debt is spiraling.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty in Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for February 26th through March 4th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature backdated 1-ounce silver maples at $3.39 over spot. We also have 1-ounce gold Valcambi bars at only $59 over spot. And finally, we're offering our choice 1-ounce Palladium bars at just $119 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty in Finance. And back with us today is our good friend Peter Grandich from Peter Grandich & Company. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Elijah.
Well, I know you'll be celebrating your 40th anniversary in the finance sector, so congratulations on that. You've talked about how America is entering into the worst social, political, and economic environment we've seen, and you're going to be writing a post soon about really there are 5 factors that are leading us to this major crisis. Can you expand on some of these factors, and then we can maybe get into some specifics later?
Well, first, let me say is I don't know where the 40 years went to, but here I am. And it's an amazing, when we think of some of the things I'm about to share about you, they were unthinkable when I started, or maybe even through the half of that career. So you're right. I have this opinion, separate from what the markets may do in the next few days, weeks, or even months. But somewhere in a 3 to 5 year period, and that could either be 1 or 7, but certainly within most people's now lifetime that are watching this. It's not off in the yonder anymore. It's coming into focus. 5 majors. There's more, but these are the major factors that derive that. The number one and overriding remains our debt crisis. It's now spiraling out of control. We're watching the Congressional Budget Office boost up again, just less than a year later, to now saying that we're going to be at $54 trillion in national debt in less than 10 years. When just a year ago that was 50, and 2 years before that it was only 38. So they recognized how out of control the national debt is spiraling. But there's also the consumer debt, state debt, and corporate debt thrown into that. But the debt is still the number one crisis. Now, some people say, oh, you guys have been saying that for years. Well, you're right. It took 37 years to get to the first 9.7 trillion in debt. It took this government only 10 quarters to do the same. So one thing is clear, it's clearly being piled on much faster, and that's more harmful. And why I say that's important, I think this is important for people to take a moment, Elijah, on this. Last year, this government took in a little over 5 trillion in revenue, 5.3 trillion. If we had a 5% interest rate at that point, and we had to refinance 50 trillion, we'll have to come up with $2.5 trillion in interest expense. And Elijah, we have to come up with it. We can print more paper, but we have to pay back. That's not something you can put to a side. So yeah, in 10 years, there'll be some growth, hopefully, in revenue, but it's not going to grow anywhere as much as that interest expense. The country can't run on anything that we're accustomed to if half our money is going to interest expense. And that's all within most of the people, God willing, watching this lifetime. That's number one. Number two, right behind that, is a retirement and aging crisis. The retirement crisis is very simple. 65% of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck. A liar, they're never going to reach that golden dream of stop working and living some sort of half luxurious life for the rest of our natural life. They are going to be harder to work because of their age, and they're going to need more support from the government because of their age. Now, on top of that, there's an aging crisis. As we just shared, we get older, more medical costings. But here's where the thing that's not being discussed at all. When we get into our 80s and maybe 90s, if there's an opportunity to sustain life, even if it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix something, new lung, whatever it may be, I think most people are going to want to have that. And they're going to feel they're required to have it because they have Medicare or what have you. Well, by that point, there's going to be a 30 or 40 or maybe even a 50-year-old working, being taxed up to here going, oh, wait a minute, I can't even put food on my table. And now you want some 88-year-old person. No, I can't deal with that. Some people go, yeah, but I can't see them doing anything about that. Oh, yes, you can. Because by then, the boomers will have peaked and the millennials and others will be more of. And that's where the money shift would be. And let me just tell you this. Politicians follow where the money is. So they may not be able to speak and knock those things now, but in 10 or 20 years, we will be. So I believe there'll be this aging crisis as well. Now, the third factor is something that's battling number one right now. When I started this view on January 1st, it was number three, and that's the immigration invasion. And that has secular and spiritual ramifications. And if you like, I can kind of separate that if you like me to.
Sure. And obviously, I think when it comes to spiritual ramifications, I mean, they are definitely tied into the secular, or you could say the material ramifications. So if you can address both of them, and I think they're not necessarily 100% separated, but yeah, definitely.
Well, there is. Well, first of all, let's understand that there's a certain percentage of Americans now that openly say that they're agnostic or atheist. So religion doesn't enter their decision making. But for those that still may, and for me as a Catholic Christian, normally I try to separate, my Catholic faith from my secular work, but I do wear it on my sleeve, and it'd be hard not to know it if you have any working with me. So the first way I'd like to describe it to people is not everybody coming into this country is what some would say are criminals. They're going to blow up the world, all of this. Not many of that. There's a percentage, and it doesn't take much really to cause harm, but not everybody. A lot of the people are just poor people coming from very poor countries who are glad that they're gone. They're not sitting there, please don't go. They're like driving them to the border because it eliminates them having them under their watch. But what they're coming to, and when they get here, even though it still may not be up to our living standards, for them, it's nirvana. Housing, food, clothing, money in their pockets, health care. Who wouldn't want to walk a couple of thousand miles if they had to bring their family and all for that and all? And I guess that's where some of the spiritual part ends. You wouldn't want to deny that to people, but let's understand that we're supposed to do that through a law abiding as part of also the spiritual, and they're not. Okay, they're not doing that, but they all come basically in one way, with their shirts on their back. So they're liabilities. There's no assets in that. Yes, some will say, oh, they'll do the work that other Americans don't want to work, and part of that is true and all. But almost all of them are going to also call on the government in some way, shape, or form for assistance, even when they come legal, or if and when they come legal. So that's another burden the government's facing. And the last two are interesting, especially since the fourth one, Wall Street scoffs at now, still makes fun of it, anybody that brings it up. Even the few Main Street, Wall Street friends that I still have say, Pete, stop talking about that. It's nothing to worry about. And that's the BRICS, the formation of countries coming together to trade without U.S. participation, not lessen, but without, and also be involved in any of the financial aspects of that, including banking and what have you. I think this is the most underestimated situation Wall Street is making an error on, forgetting all the others, crime. There are many other things we could talk about. And even if the BRICS don't grow to a level some of us think they will, let's not forget that whatever they end up doing, that used to be done with the U.S., and now it won't be. And that has ramifications. And then the fifth one, which if it was working, we wouldn't worry too much about the four that I told you. But it's broken more than any of the four, and that's political paralysis. Elijah, let's face facts, Democrat or Republican. Neither has, nor does anyone really want to work with each other in any legitimate way for several years now. And not only that, but now there's significant members in each party who are fracturing away from their own party, that they have major differences. And this is the group, the politicians, that you're going to be expecting to come together to fix these and other issues that are clearly before us. The severity may be the discussion, but no one will deny what we just talked about are important factors. And so somewhere in that time frame, it's going to be a much more difficult environment socially, politically, and economically for the vast majority of Americans. And I'll tell you, to our planning group, Elijah, 9 out of 10 Americans aren't even close to being planning for it, or even if they have an A plan, because that's all mostly Wall Street gives in their financial planning. They give them a plan and don't worry about it. But I'll tell you, after working 20 years with athletes and professional teams, they all have a plan B and C as they enter the game. And I think not having a plan B or C is going to be to the detriment to a lot of investors.
One of the only things that the politicians can agree on now or get something passed is if it's a huge spending bill, like we saw the COVID spending bill. This was it $6 trillion, the biggest spending bill ever. So that just makes the problem worse ultimately if you go back to your first issue with the debt. So it doesn't seem like we're really going to get out of this in any way.
Yeah, they haven't. Just understand this. These are constant budget resolutions. We go down to this fear of the government shutting. And we haven't had really two budgets come to agreements in Congress in maybe 20 years. I'll have to look after we're done, but I think that's a fair, good guess. And it's just insanity. And we didn't even talk about in that talking or take into consideration the entitlements that people believe that they're still going to see, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. There's no money. It's shocking how people still think there's some money sitting somewhere that's going to be used to take care of that. And remember, all those situations, including the immigration law, they're being added on to that. The Medicaid, they can't walk into a hospital without giving care, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, it is a Pandora's box that's been wide opened. And I still see in this current stock market mania and somewhat cryptomania that investors as a group have no real idea past their nose what we're leading, what kind of road we're going down.
No, I did want to hone in on immigration and some of the different aspects of that. You mentioned how in an article you recently wrote, you mentioned how it really there's this debate, right, about whether it's an invasion or it's not. And the left is saying, well, it's not an invasion because there aren't weapons involved. You make the good point, though, that it is an invasion. And actually, it is almost an act of war in some sense because it has to do with economics.
Yeah, it's an economic warfare.
Right. It's an economic war. And that's kind of what a lot of wars end up being nowadays, is just economic wars. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I forget the exact saying, but even Abraham Lincoln said it years and years ago. We'll never be defeated outside, but it'll be internal stuff that'll basically defeat us. And that's correct. The economics of this, the cost of this, you know what's interesting? People tend to react only once it's directly impacting them, no matter what subject you're talking about. So when the immigration really started on the early days of Biden, because let's face facts, say what you want about Trump, and I'm not here to talk politics, but immigration was under much better control at that time, illegal immigration, than it was the moment Biden took over. So how many people have come in since then. There are estimates for as little as 7 million to 10 million. Some estimate 15 or 20 million. As we noted before, they come really with their only shirts on the back. But for an early part of time, where we were sitting in the country, we saw was basically only impacting a couple states, the border states, Texas, Arizona, California. So me in New Jersey, or my friends in Minnesota or New Hampshire or North Dakota. Feel bad for those people, but not impacted me. Then the governor down there, a couple of them got smart, not the one in California, because I don't think he can get smart if you really want me to answer honestly. But the bottom line is they put them on buses and they start to send these people to all the sanctuary cities that used to advertise, if this ever happens, come here, we'll take care of you. Well, that didn't last very long. And now people within those cities are seeing their day-to-day services, watching illegals receive cash, food, clothing, staying in hotels for weeks, and homeless people, veterans and all, and people who've been here a while but been struggling to survive are pushed aside. Now it's impacting the day-to-day, and that's where the battle is going to come. And here's the real serious issue that's going to come this summer, Elijah. As these poor souls are being housed in tent cities and all this type of stuff, when the weather gets warm, and we've already seen it in New York and some other places, it's going to be very hard to expect these people to stay centralized. And as they expand and start going out into the suburbs, then all heck is going to break loose. And I'm not looking for civil war, and I'm not looking for people to arm themselves at all. But we're watching certain governors ask people to take them in. People can't take them in. They're struggling to keep themselves alive. They want you to take in strangers who the government will keep assisting, but not you who's taking them in. So the immigration issue is coming to the forefront. Don't let the debt fool you. That's still number one. But that's probably the biggest political issue. And you know how we know it? Because now Biden is claiming he's going to take action. And that's only happening because they realized how much they're getting hurt in polls and other things as this election draws closer. But what actions he is going to take, the cat has been let out of the bag. There's so many people here now, and unless you start deporting them, they're still going to fall into those needs that we just spoke about.
Out of the 5 things you mentioned, it seems like most of them, we don't want to say there's no hope, but we can see the trajectory, and we can see that our political leaders aren't going to make much of a difference when it comes to those issues. I do see that immigration, though, it seems like could the immigration invasion, as you have called it, the problem could be fixed under Trump versus under Biden. So it seems like there is maybe a light at the end of the tunnel there. Your perspective on that, is there hope of actually changing the situation depending on which way the election goes?
So here's the thing that I say, because I got to say in this household, in the other room is the Trumpster. I'm not a Trumpster, but I'm not a Democrat either. I like some of the things Trump says. The way he says it and how he treats people is another matter for me. But having said that, on the basis that he wins and is installed, okay, and he's brought in, you're right. I'm certain in the early days, there will be actions taken and supported by his administration. The problem is this: if we realize all these actions that have been taken even before he was first elected, the claims that were made while he was elected, how that election went, and then what people have done to him since then, to think that will all stop on his election and these people will just go, okay, we lost. Let's let it go. Let's live on. I think the opposite. I think they'll grow more incensed and more troublesome. They're already started floating this thing. Somehow the Republicans and Trump are involved with the Russians again. I'm shocked that they think that'll still work, that they didn't come up with some other angle. But I think it's very, very sad at this point that no matter who wins, about half of America will absolutely dislike that person that's in there. You know, I joke, if I may say, with my Canadian friends. I just spoke with one before we did. And he talked about, how about we trade our leaders? I said, we can't. It's why? Because we're each going to think we got the short end of the stick. It's very sad that there isn't anybody present that can seem to truly unify or bring at least some acceptance that, okay, maybe it's not the best person, but we'll try to work with them. So I think, yes, one side will be kind of happy right after the election, but I think whoever wins is going to still run into huge problems because half the country is going to wish or do everything they can to unearth or unseat that person from continuing or doing what they hope to do. And that's why I struggle with the current two people who are the expected people who will be running for the presidency and be to vote for come November.
So if we can't change these problems on a political level, what are some ways that we can take charge in our own life to prepare for what's coming?
Well, it's a way that, as I celebrate my 40th year, I didn't live this way at all, what I'm about to tell you in my first 20. Not only was I a legend in my own mind and the chairman of the Me, Myself, and I Society back then, Elijah, but after 20 years, I started to change, and especially after 10, I succumbed to both my faith, which became critical and most important, but I started to live a less is more attitude. I still see in our planning group, the vast majority of people living beyond their means. We just see it every month as personal income is half of whatever personal spending is. Well, somehow, if spending's 0.6% and personal income is only 0.3%, you had to get it from somewhere to make personal spending twice, and we continue to borrow. I think one of the first things people need to do is, again, look at their debt situation. Now, spiritually, it's very important because in biblical, there's no biblical support to debt. In fact, all scripture is about the harm of debt. But even if you're secular, it makes common sense that debt in most cases a lot of it is not good. Second is the government can only do two things to sustain the government. It can raise taxes and it can also cut spending. So one of the ways that they're raising taxes is very alarming. 7 states, led by Vermont, is trying to implement a wealth tax, starting with very wealthy people, but the very, very rich will always find a way to get around that. So eventually it will fall down to far less wealthy people. But one thing that's asinine that Biden administration tried, it was shot down at first. Some of the states, including Vermont, are trying to implement it. And I call it the most asinine idea ever to come out of the United States for a matter of things related to money. They want to have an unrealized capital gains tax. Now, that is taxing a gain before it's an actual gain. And the simplest way I like to put it to people is you buy a stock, $1 stock, 10,000 shares because it's a biotech company and they got a new way to cure cancer. And come December 31st, they're really doing good. It's $2 a share. You hold it into the new year. As far as Uncle Sam's concerned, come next April 15th, you owe $10,000 because it went from 1 to 2 and you had a paper gain of 10,000. Sorry, January 4th, the bio announcement didn't really work. We got to go back to the drawing board. Stock plummets to $1 or less. As far as the government's going to be concerned, you still owe $10,000. It's asinine. It's like deciding in a horse race somewhere halfway through the race based on where the horses are. That one won, that one lost. What do you do now? They want to talk about families that passed on assets, farms, buildings. They want to say that not only going to get rid of the step-up issue that you use today's value, but somehow you're supposed to find out what the value was originally and pay tax on it now, even if you still own that farm or building. And remember, when hard assets like that pass, the people are paper rich, but they're liquid poor. And many are going to be forced to sell just to meet a tax that hasn't even come into existence yet. And folks who are listening to this is real. Google this after you watch this interview. Several states and the federal government. And as we get that bigger and bigger debt, and as it's harder and harder to keep functioning the government, these are issues that are going to come. So look for higher taxes. Don't vote for anybody that tells you we guarantee we're going to lower your taxes, because they can't. Even if they try it, it's going to be back up. And also recognize that be more self-sufficient. The less needs to count on the government, the better you're going to be, because the government's going to be under a lot of stress as the years go by.
And it's even worse if you think about how if an asset increases over time, maybe just because of inflation, right? Capital gains doesn't take into consideration that there's inflation as well. So it's like, it's not even taxing real gains at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think what will happen, and my insurance friends don't like when they hear this, but one of the great things that people should have for any estate planning is insurance, basically whole life in that regard, because it passes tax-free. There's a lot of other advantages to it. One of these days, I don't think it's anytime soon, there's a powerful lobbying in Washington, but it is something when it gets real stressed, they're going to have to look at, is all this money that passes tax-free. And that's something someday that's going to be looked at as well. The government is just going to become more and more difficult. And here's the thing that I most dislike about what our government's doing. And this is both sides of the aisle. This is one side. Years ago, we supported the people that went out of their way to help others. Now we demoralize them. Listen, about 10 or maybe 15% of Americans need to get in some sort of wagon. They need some sort of help for a variety of issues. And good Americans over time would pull that wagon. And the government go, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you helping out. Now we demonize those people. We attack them, and we build up. And in fact, we put more people in the wagon that should be in the wagon. And so you get to the point where, well, how do I get in the wagon? And the very rich will find ways. They'll leave the country. They'll move money offshore and all. And so more of the burden in this scenario are going to fall onto the working class. That's why when you look at the last 10 or go long before the pandemic, the vast majority of Americans have not moved forward. At best, they've held their own. At worst, they've declined. Very small group is making it to that top of the pyramid. The rest is struggling or drowning or absolutely collapsing down to the bottom of the pyramid. And again, that's something that financial people don't want to talk about because it's not palatable and it's not sellable. But I think you got to deal with the reality of that.
Now, the last topic I'd like to discuss, one thing that we've talked about before, is obviously that investing in precious metals is a way to protect against the crisis that that it seems like we're heading into, based on those 5 factors you've shared with us. Now, you sent me a chart earlier today where it's showing really that it seems like gold is really setting up for a bullish move ahead. It broke above resistance, and now that resistance is support. Based on that chart, what are you looking for in the gold market coming in the next few months?
So I have used gold as a capital appreciation vehicle. There are other reasons to own it, for inflation, for possession. I am never going to be to any Bitcoin or cryptocurrency sleep at night knowing that my security is based on a ledger somewhere sitting out in cyberspace, and as long as there's electricity, I can turn on my computer and look at it. Give me something that's worth something I can hold in my hand or know where it's stored. I can reach it and touch it at all. So with that in mind, even if you don't think some of these dire issues, I believe gold can be played for pure capital appreciation. And if you look at the chart, if you go back to the fall of 2022, gold hovered around 1650. And since then, and there'll be arrows noting it, as it moved up, it went through those, some people call them manipulations, some call it slammies, and others, goes through these corrective phases that don't last long. But it kept making a series of higher lows all the way up until now. While now what used to be heavy resistance has really turned into support, and that's the 2000 psychological number. How many days now we've basically been above other than one day. And now it is turning up also on the shorter term charts. And to me, this continuous accumulation, and remember, it's doing this in front of stock market mania, cryptocurrency mania, a dollar that has still stayed up, high interest rates, things that are normally should be pushing it down are not. And just look at it as a boxer, because remember, gold is treated like kryptonite by most of the investment world. So it is this poor little guy against this champion that's going to be knocked out in the first round, somehow has now gone to the 14th round of a 15-round fight, and it's still in there, and it's counterpunching. And this counterpunching is its ability to show this relative strength versus all the things we just said. And the moment there's a little break in any of them, the stock market peaks, cryptocurrency, which I think, as I've called since last July, was going to run all the way up to this halving. And then after the halving, boy, if you're still in Bitcoin, you should really head to the exit. But nevertheless, that an eventual interest rate cut probably towards the second half of this year, because that's when it's going to become apparent that we're in a recession, and all this garbage employment monthly numbers that'll be retracted and shown that employment isn't anywhere as strong. That's going to be the bust out to when we get above 2,100 in gold and stay there. And then the momentum, traders come in, and then it's off to the races. Then I legitimately think my target of 2,500 is real. And with it, silver will follow and occasionally lead. But gold and silver, both for capital appreciation and preservation of capital, I don't sell it. I know you do, Elijah. I don't get any commissions. I don't have dry food or ammo or anything else that people could buy. Most people in our planning don't like most of what you and I spoke about tonight. It doesn't lead them to become clients. Many start looking for the exit. But I can tell you is I'm extremely bullish on gold. It has fought off all the negators, all the weak-kneed bulls, and the many, many bears, including the financial media that basically writes against it. And it's within a few trading days of a new all-time high. But I really think it can go a lot higher. I think minimally it'll go to 2,500 in the next 12 to 24 months. And if some of those things that we spoke about early on start to take hold and it's seen by the average person, then you could talk about a larger number. But right now, 2,500 is a good gain from here.
Well, Peter Grandich, we really appreciate your time today. It'll be exciting to continue to track these markets and the economic conditions with you. So we'd love to have you back on again soon. Where can our viewers find you if they're interested in learning more?
Well, for the few that would still want to hear me after our discussion, there's petergrandich.com. There's a blog. I do a lot of my commentary on Twitter. It's at Peter Grandich. And there's also a YouTube channel where I put up my interviews like this. And on occasion, I interview certain people that I think are worthy to hear.
Fantastic. Peter, thank you so much for your time, and God bless.
God bless you. Pleasure.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty in Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for February 26th through March 4th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature backdated 1-ounce silver maples at $3.39 over spot. We also have 1-ounce Gold Valcambi bars at only $59 over spot. And finally, we're offering our choice 1-ounce Palladium bars at just $119 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.